Hey all, here OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a closer look at the Bigme B6. This is a color Kaleido 3 6-inch e-reader that's technically running on Android 14, and it's actually offering pretty good value. That is, for around $160, we have a model which uses a octa-core 2.3 GHz processor from MediaTek, 4 GB of RAM, 64 GB of built-in storage, which is further expandable via a micro SD card slot at the bottom, and even includes some pretty funky looking colors, including this magnetic folio case thrown in as part of the packaging, which is actually quite interesting because if you guys recall, a couple of days ago, we checked out a Xiaomi e-reader / Moan e-reader. That one was more expensive at around $200 to $300 and also had a slower quad-core rock chip processor versus the octa-core chip in here. In fact, the Xiaomi version came with only 2 GB of RAM versus 4 gigs of RAM. So the hardware, at least on paper, seems to be a more promising value proposition. But let's find out whether the overall user experience matches those specs. So anyways, the chassis of the B6 here is crafted out of a polycarbonate plastic, but it does feel actually pretty solid at roughly 6.9 millimeters. There's also a 36 level adjustable front light or glow light, and you can change it to be a slightly warmer hue versus a slightly colder hue, which becomes a bit more apparent in a slightly darker space or environment. And this is a 300 ppi resolution display, which is among the highest res that you'll find currently in this crop of e-readers, making it relatively sharp and crisp when it comes to text details. Aside from the main panel, there's also a 0.3-inch section at the bottom, including some capacitive buttons for quick shortcut commands, which is a little different from what we've seen from Bigme in the past. So when combined, it's roughly a 6.3-inch dimension, which is going to be touch sensitive using those virtual keys. Now, because it is running on a full version of Android, it does mean you can install any APKs or reading apps of your choice, including the Kindle app, other cloud-based apps for accessing your documents. In fact, there is the full Google Play Store on here as well for downloading apps directly, as well as translation capabilities. So it's also serving as an AI translator in addition to a e-reader, or really a e-ink based Android tablet, I should say. What I also like about the B6 is that it comes in a variety of more customizable colors. For example, we have the green version, but it also comes in a full white finish, including the back panel, as well as a black version as well, based on your preferences. And then the cover that comes included as part of the packaging also includes different colors like blue versus a green one. There's even a pink one, a very subtle shade closer to white, a gray one, and also a purple can all be found. And all of these color combinations, including the case as well as the actual e-reader chassis, can be matched freely based on your preferences. The e-reader also includes built-in speakers as well, so if you're listening to audiobooks or playing back a podcast, you can listen directly, which is an advantage compared to some other e-readers we've seen in the past, like the first generation Kindle Scribe, as well as the Xiaomi e-readers are all missing a built-in loudspeaker. Granted, there is built-in Bluetooth as well, so you can connect to external headphones and speakers of your choice if you want more volume output. Now, a quick asterisk on the display resolution. The 300 ppi is when you're looking at black and white text, including reading books on here, compared to 150 ppi is for color images. So that particular color layer is not going to be quite as crisp as when you're looking at the text details in black and white. So just keep that in mind, but that's primarily a limitation on the current generation Kaleido 3 technology, instead of being unique to only the Bigme B6. And at 6 inches, it's a little bit more compact compared to their 7-inch e-reader that we reviewed last year called the B7051C. This one instead does have physical page turn control buttons though on the side, which are missing in the more compact, slightly more streamlined B6 over here, giving you a little more compactness, but does rely on the capacitive touchscreen instead. Also, the 7-inch version previously did have a active stylus pen, which allowed you to use it for some annotation and notes, which is also one functionality not found on the more budget-conscious B6. But again, we are talking about a price difference here of close to $100 less. Here's also their Bigme Hybrid, which is their smartphone-sized e-reader, also having nearly 6 inches, technically a 5.8-inch display, and also comes in black and white e-ink as well as color e-ink versions. However, this one has a taller 2:1 aspect ratio screen compared to the more conventional 16:9 on the B6, although the Hybrid might be a little bit more pocketable as a result. And as far as packaging contents are concerned, again, the folio case locks into place using magnets pretty securely, just like a small journal. Very petite and cute, in fact, next to even a typical size phone these days. As you can tell here, again, it's actually quite small, all things considered. So you actually get all of these in separate boxes in the packaging, which is interesting. There's a separate little box here for the standard Type-C cable for charging and syncing, although there is no wall adapter. The separate magnetic folio case is in its own little box, and then we have the actual compartment here, which holds the e-reader itself. This one here being the green version also has a magnet of its own and includes a quick user guide. Now, the magnetic folio case also has an auto on and off sensor. So whenever you flip open the case, it will turn on by itself, as you can see there, which is nice if you don't want to use the physical power key located on the very top, which is also accented in red. I like the splash of additional color. Again, very playful in terms of the chassis, which I am a fan of on this B6. You also find access to the microphones and loudspeakers. Taking a closer look at the UI next, it's relatively familiar compared to past Bigme devices we've seen. So their launcher on top of Android gives you unlimited pages that you can expand on as you download more applications, as well as universal search on the very top that can pull up the virtual keyboard. Furthermore, you can swipe down over here to access the command center, as well as some shortcuts for split screen multitasking, which will look something like this. For example, right now we have the alarm clock app open here on the very top. So that is one benefit of having a slightly faster processor for a e-reader, of course. It's still not going to be quite as flagship grade compared to a $1,000 smartphone, but for a reader-esque device, it still feels pretty snappy and responsive for the most part. Screen rotation, including auto rotation functionality, so you can actually use it in a horizontal orientation. There is a built-in screen recorder app, as well as airplane mode on the final tab. Now the B6 here does not have a SIM card slot, so just keep that in mind. You can't connect to cellular data connectivity, so it is going to be Wi-Fi only, but I think that's a reasonable decision for more of a budget-conscious model. We're also able to change the volume controls directly on here, as well as the aforementioned screen brightness, as well as color temperature, including a couple of presets for turning everything completely off, going into a daytime profile and nighttime. Again, one of the advantages of e-ink screens is you can technically use it outdoors in direct sunlight. In fact, the brighter that it gets, the easier it is to read. So if you're lounging by a beach or by a pool, it's going to be one benefit here compared to LCD and OLED screens if the brightness isn't cranked all the way up, because it requires a backlight. And if you turn the brightness all the way high, of course it's going to drain more power. The device might get a little bit more warm and toasty as well. So that's why reading using an e-ink screen can be quite comfortable, similar to printed text on paper, which is pretty neat. And then the front light, if you need it, is just sandwiched in between the glass as well as the e-ink panel there. Also, one other benefit of e-ink is if it sits persistently on a static image or maybe a page of a book, it actually draws no power at all. It only consumes electricity when you're refreshing the page and the pixels are blinking, which is why it can have an always-on display mode of sorts. If it's turned off, you can see it's always going to be showing a wallpaper, draining no power at all. Now that being said, because this one is running on Android, it definitely depends on the types of applications that you're using. For example, if you have the front light turned on to maximum and you're constantly refreshing it, running more complex apps, then it's going to be closer to a smartphone, lasting you about a day or two before you have to recharge it again. On the other hand, if you have Wi-Fi turned off and you're just using it like a Kindle for reading books, it can definitely last you longer than the phone, getting closer to a week or so before you have to recharge it again. Now, there's also a little floating ball as another accessibility function, which allows you to jump into multitasking, taking a screenshot, giving you some of those shortcuts regardless of where you are on the operating system. Now, last but not least, what's mentioned as app configuration can perhaps be better labeled as screen display modes, because if you tap on here, it's going to pull up this section called X Launcher, in which you're able to choose between magazine, comic, video, and in all of these, you can adjust the refresh frequency. For example, after X page turns, the entire screen will blink to get rid of any ghosting. Alternatively, in the video mode, it's going to be a faster refresh rate, so it's better for vertical scrolling, also if you're web browsing. However, it will have a little bit more ghosting and artifacting on the screen as a result, prioritizing higher resolution versus a faster refresh rate. Alternatively, if you swipe down from the top left-hand section, this will pull up any notifications. Now, the bottom virtual keys, maybe one side note is that these particular controls are not backlit. So if you are in a completely dark space, again, something to keep in mind, but this allows you to jump more quickly into the home page versus going into the advanced settings, providing us with some additional control, including font size. We can also enable a screen lock similar to an Android phone or tablet, including a password or a PIN, although there is no fingerprint authentication on the hardware of of this more entry-level device. A basic file manager can also be found. And then for key function, what's neat is you're able to reprogram and customize all of these virtual keys based on applications that you're commonly using. So they are remappable controls, including the ability to disable or turn these buttons on and off if you don't want to use them and find them to be distracting. So by default, this one will take you into your bookshelf, but instead you can use it as a virtual Android back key, manually refresh the screen, so on and so forth. And same thing can be said about all the other controls as well. By default, the AI button here will open up the Bigme, aka ChatGPT interface, which we can instead program to do something else instead. So I do like this level of customization. It's nice to see. And last but not least, you can also check for any firmware updates, system updates as they become available. And then, of course, swiping up from the bottom section here to the top will return you back into the main home screen. Other gestures, including swiping from the edge of the screen, similar to, again, stock Android, allows you to go back by one page as well. So relatively familiar. You can also find a basic calendar, which is built by Bigme as some utility tools. They've also slightly customized the gallery app, including some color images that you can see as example of what this, again, Kaleido 3 color ink display looks like, which of course isn't going to be as contrast rich compared to a traditional OLED or LCD IPS display. It's more like a magazine having a slightly more faded color to it, but also definitely you can tell apart the colors. So if you're looking at some basic images or comics, it's still nice to have overall. Again, serving as some final examples here and there, including one here, which is another spec sheet, reiterating some of the functionality and specs that we saw there from before. So working well enough. Here's also a snippet of what the speakers sound like using a video clip that also comes pre-included.
From greater self to smaller self. From big me to small me.
So it's definitely audible. Again, there is no standard 3.5mm headphone jack, but you can also opt for Bluetooth if you want even better audio or for private listening. You can trigger a slightly faster screen refresh rate and have an experience that looks something like this. As for the core bookshelf section, you're able to read pretty much all of the popular document file types, including PDFs, EPUBs, Mobi documents, Word, Excel can all be supported. But of course, the beauty of this running on Android is you can also download other reading tools and apps based on your preferences, but this is the default one that comes included. We have a simplified clock at the very bottom section here, and we can tap on the left and right regions to turn the page left and right. As you can tell, overall it is looking quite clear for the most part when it comes to text details, even smaller fonts, including this table. We can also long hold on certain words to look up the dictionary definition, including a second tap here for translating it into a second language of your choice. You're also able to annotate by using the keyboard here, since there isn't really a stylus for drawing directly on the page. Similarly, you can also pull up a Wikipedia or encyclopedia page as well to look at the pronunciation guide, as well as the roots and also some examples of how the word is being used. It's essentially a smaller window, which is accessing the browser, as you can tell there, which is actually kind of cool. You can even use pinch to zoom as well if you choose to do so. So for highlighting as well, you can also change the color of the highlight a little bit more freely. And since this is a color e-ink display, that is going to be a benefit here compared to a black and white panel where all of the highlighting marks are going to be just gray. So if you want to categorize and organize your notes by color, that is possible on a unit like this, just by long holding. And you also have copy and paste support as well, similar to stock Android if you want to then search it up yourself on the web. And then last but not least, you can also access the aforementioned large language model capability just by tapping on that section there, and it will paste in that particular word or phrase. And on the very top here, you can also change the model between the ChatGPT based one versus DeepSeek, providing you with a summarized form. For example, rewriting it, expanding it, explaining it, asking questions, creating a bullet point form of the main takeaways. So those are some examples of using this model on top of whatever document that you're currently reading, such as in this particular example, it's able to recognize what I was trying to reference and providing some additional recommendations. Alternatively, here's another EPUB document instead. We're also able to use pinch to zoom controls for making the font size slightly larger versus smaller, as you can tell there. So really not bad. I would say the core reading experience remaining quite comfortable thanks to the lightweight chassis, but still feeling solid without really flexing. And again, the accelerometer also remains usable here as well as you're reading if you prefer a slightly different layout based on the document type that you're looking at. Now exploring some of the other built-in apps, including the Bigme V2T. This is essentially their version of an AI voice recorder that provides you transcription capabilities built in using the microphone as well as loudspeaker. It's going to be quite similar to something like the Plod Note AI voice recorder that we've reviewed a while back, but after a couple of seconds, you can see the transcription happening in real time. As you can see there, it might be better for accessibility reasons, or if you're in a meeting, or perhaps a lecture as part of a student, you're able to then read back the notes a little bit more comfortably later on. A couple of other languages are also supported, and then in the future, you'll be able to play back the recording while reading back the notes, and also generate an AI summary version using the large language model. So that's actually quite neat. You can also bring up the keyboard for correcting any typos as part of the transcription, adding in any sentences. I think it mostly makes sense to have a couple of these tools available. Now, when you turn off the display, you can also have a slightly different customization in terms of a clock view or a calendar view, which you can also have it automatically refresh every X minutes. So for example, if we apply this particular layout when it turns off, providing us with basic time and date information at a glance, even when you're not using the e-reader, you can just have it displayed on the side of your desk, kind of like a e-ink digital clock, again drawing very little power unless the time or digits are being refreshed. Moving a little more quickly through some of the other utility tools that they have baked into the software, there's also a document translation app. For example, if someone sends you a document in a foreign language, you can translate it to your own language. You can also find a couple of other formats in terms of the type of document that you're trying to translate, as long as the file is in a Word or a plain text format, and also needs to be around 5 MB in terms of size. So it can't be a massive encyclopedia, but more for memos and shorter notes, I would say, that you want to translate into a second language. Otherwise, this is what the music player app looks like. It's pretty basic, but you are able to sort by artist as well as name. WPS Office for Android is also built on in if you're trying to look back at any kind of Word documents and quickly edit them through. This is going to be a faster refresh rate mode. So again, it's not quite as crisp in terms of sharpness, a bit more ghosting, but it's not blinking as often as traditional e-ink. And then we have the basic translator apps between two languages of your choice. You can also go into a split screen view that looks something like this for your side versus the other person if you're setting it onto a table. So this is a quick test of the voice translation capabilities on the Bigme e-reader. And we're also able to see other languages that you can drag down here using the bar. There's around 36 languages or so supported in this default app. Of course, there's nothing stopping you from downloading something like Google Translate yourself because it does have the full Google Play Store, but this is just the built-in first-party app. You can also find a basic voice recorder here as well, which doesn't have the AI transcription modes, simply saving the recording itself, and also launching exclusively into the AI app for a larger expanded view as you're reading it back. You can find a couple of more tabs up top, including a composition section. If you wanted to create a type of outline or document for you, you can then add the prompt in, as well as an AI draw allows you to generate some images based on your prompting as well. Interestingly, there's also an application tab, including the ability for you to clone certain apps if you want to run a second instance. So this might be a little bit more useful if you want to have maybe two accounts when it comes to email or social media that you want to run on the same device. And then last but not least, under App Store, this is actually Bigme's first-party app store, different from the Google Play Store, which is also built in. On here, you're able to find some optimized apps for reading, as well as productivity that Bigme recommends. For example, Slack, Firefox web browser, Chrome, Evernote, some other reading tools, including Kobo Books, Google Books. Under Learn, you can find Duolingo, and also for news, you can find WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, so on and so forth, and some quick shortcuts that you can just tap there to download without even signing in with your Google account. Just quickly cycling through as some final examples. Now, by the way, because it is a very boxy e-reader in terms of the sides and edges, it can also stand upright onto a tabletop, having a pretty modern and minimalist style to it overall. So those are all the built-in applications. Again, we downloaded Google Maps just to serve as an example, and in here as well, it's going to use a slightly faster refresh rate, enter Street View as well as check out directions, take a closer look at some of these sample images. Now let's also jump into the standard web browser for our final look. This is the Bigme browser, but again, you can use standard Google Chrome, Firefox, but overall not bad in terms of Wi-Fi reception strength as well due to the plastic chassis. Opening a site like CNET or The Verge just to serve as an example, similar to using a magazine, it's definitely going to take a split second longer for it to eventually load compared to again a flagship grade smartphone, but it's still a serviceable experience, I would say. Text details also look clear enough, and using this automatic faster refresh rate mode when you're scrolling still seems to be mostly doable. So not bad. It's definitely not going to flash quite as often as on earlier generations of e-ink screens. When it comes to webtoons or comics on this device, again, maybe a little bit better compared to a completely black and white display. If you want to see some splash of color, just provides you with a little bit more of immersiveness, I guess, if you are comparing it to a completely grayscale device. So not bad as you're scrolling up and down. Again, serving as another example here for images and comics. Surprisingly, the device also remains relatively cool in operation. It's not really thermally throttling or getting too warm either at the back as you're pressing it a little bit harder for web browsing and multitasking. So there we have it. That's more or less it as far as our closer look at the Bigme B6 e-reader. Again, for an entry-level e-reader that is essentially the most affordable model in their current lineup, I think they've done a reasonably good job. It's quite attractive in terms of the way it looks, all of the colors that you're able to choose between, as well as the magnetic folio case, which is pre-included, all working pretty nicely. It's compact and comfortable to use. The display itself, as well as the hardware in terms of the octa-core processor, are all quite competitive, if not a little bit better than I expected for an entry-level model in this price point. And the fact that it is running on a full version of Android 14 means that you can customize it based on your preferences, including installing other launchers if you want to go that way as well. Definitely not bad as a fun, entry-level color e-reader. Of course, if you're looking for more pro features like stylus input support, physical page turn controls, or cellular connectivity, you'll be better served by some of the other devices that we've seen previously from them. But if you're primarily using something like this just for reading, then honestly this is not a bad choice at all, representing pretty good value for the money, I have to say, as a simple, no-frills e-reader. So you can check out more details if you're interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That has been the relatively elegant and minimalistic styled Bigme B6.